4-Star Nursery, Garden and Home, your coastal gardener. We have had so many people asking about videos, good Lord, asking about orchid care. We did a video a long time ago before mics and all of this stuff. So I really thought this was a great opportunity to kind of do a redo/review of orchid care. So the orchids that I'm going to be focusing on today are Phalaenopsis. That's these guys here. This is, the common name is moth orchid. When we stock them, we try really hard to bring in different varieties. You'll see at the grocery store a lot of times they're just white. Not sure what their fascination with white is. But so we try to carry some of the more unique varieties, something with more striation like this one. I'm going to manhandle these today, so you guys are probably going to be a little shocked. The pink veining on this is just stunning. I'm really surprised it's not at my house already. And David is laughing because there's already like 50 orchids at the house. So I brought some of my orchids today that have finished blooming, and this way I can show you kind of how to handle them. First off, I wanted to talk about when it is actually done blooming. This one is at its end. Sometimes, and with a lot of these orchids, if you manage the moisture correctly, these little buds will continue to develop. It's kind of hard to see, but behind this bud that hasn't opened yet is another bud waiting to develop. You can't see it because it's behind one of the flowers. But when that node continues to be green, it means it's going to continue to send flowers out. So I have one orchid at home that started out in a really tiny pot like this, and it is now, it's probably at least 2 feet tall. Poor David, it's on the kitchen windowsill. It's really hard to navigate trying to pull the blinds down when it's really sunny, but it just keeps going. And so I staked it up so that it can just keep doing what it's doing, because it's just blooming like crazy. So if you kind of keep them going, they'll kind of keep blooming for you. If they dry out, that's when that center growth node dries out and it drops off. Once that drops off, it's kind of a done deal for that stem, but there's still more to come as far as opportunities for flowers. This has these little, what I call like sliding, you don't have to get in close, it's okay, sliding little clips that hold these in place. So on the orchid, on the stem itself, all the way up, you'll see these little nodes that alternate from side to side. These are all potentially flower spikes. So when this is done blooming, you may not be done with this flower spike. This part is done up here, but this part is not. Now, it's really important when you're cutting it back, you don't want to cut back really close to that node. You want to give it about 1/4 of an inch above. I know that seems sacrilegious because there's a flower on it, but we'll get over it. So here's my node, and here's almost, it could even be almost 1/2 inch, it looks like. But what happens is as this dries and desiccates, if it's too close to that node, it'll take that node out also. So you don't want to do that. The other thing I do is once I've cut it back, I go ahead and restake it so that it is ready to do its thing. Because what's going to happen is there's, hopefully, fingers crossed, a node that'll, or a spike that'll come out here and a spike that'll come out here. I should have brought the one that really spiked crazy at the house, but I didn't. So I have one that has 3 spikes that are done blooming. Unfortunately, the center growth node died out, so I've cut the stems back. It is branching like crazy. There's probably 2 branches on each stem that are already setting out buds. So great opportunity for a continuation of bloom. Part of the reason why mine are blooming as well as they are is Maxi. I swear I should just have a Maxi t-shirt. So what I do is every 2 weeks when I water my orchids, and I water my orchids every 2 weeks, our house is moist and cool. So my orchids don't dry out as quickly. And the other thing you want to remember too is that some of the orchids, and we'll find this out when we go to transplant them, are mixture of the materials, a mixture of green moss and bark. I think the growers have done that because it will hold more moisture for transportation and for maintenance. Because if you think about it, all these grocery stores, they're not spending time watering those orchids. They're in plastic sleeves. The goal is to get them out the door sooner than they have to care for them. So Maxi fertilizer, what I do is I do it at half strength. I do this lovely thing that my husband probably hates, which is I save these juice containers and I pre-mix my Maxi ahead of time so that it's nice and diluted. I just don't like any of that chunky stuff showing up. Then what I do is I take a lovely little bucket and I fill my bucket. I only brought 1 of these containers, but a lot of you were talking about the fact that when you put these into water, all the bark floats out. Well, you know, it's one of those kind of common sensey things. Don't have the water level be higher than the pot. So if your pot is that tall, just have the water be tall enough so it doesn't make the bark float. What I do is I then sit it into the water and I leave it here for 15 minutes. Now, the reason you want to do that is orchids are epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants that live off of other plants, traditionally trees. The reason it's an epiphyte as opposed to parasite is the orchid lives on the tree. It does not take from the tree. It only anchors itself on it and lives on that bark. That's why we want to put our orchids in bark, because that's their natural environment. They attach themselves to the tree, traditionally in the crotches of trees where debris collects and moisture collects, because what happens for them in nature is as the debris falls from the canopy, it gets caught in either leaves or their air roots and it decomposes. As it decomposes, it releases nutrients. So it's kind of this constant process. So I'm pretending now that this has soaked for 15 minutes. So I'm going to set it aside because I want to show you transplanting. Okay, this little guy, he's a little sad looking, but he's getting to a better place. You can see all these little green nodes on the side. Those are all air roots. It's very easy to get excited when you see those because you think, oh, those are all flower spikes coming out, and they're not. Traditionally, the air roots kind of, as they're coming out, they point down. So that's one way to know it. The other way to know it is that the air roots tend to be a light green that turned to silver, like this one already has. And so that's a good sign, though. That means that the plant is happy and doing okay. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be sending out all those air roots. So sometimes people come in and they go, I have all these air roots that are just like sticking out like crazy. You can kind of see it in this pot, how there's just all those air roots. Those are what attach to the tree. We call them air roots, but when they come out here, out into the air, they're called air roots. But they're also what's inside there. What you want to do, if we're transplanting this, we're going to take it apart So I'm going to show you. This is going to seem probably a little rough. Are you ready for this, David? Mm-hmm. So I give the pot a little squeeze. And so this one has not been transplanted. This one came in its material. So you can see there's a lot of, so there's moss in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently kind of pull the moss out. The problem with the moss, it's a good thing if you're a bad waterer. It's a bad thing if you're an overwaterer. And what I was doing with some of mine was overwatering them, and they were rotting. So I've learned to kind of pull back. They probably prefer to be slightly neglected. So all of these brown desiccated roots where literally it just feels like there's a piece of wire in the center, those all have to go, which is a large percentage of this. So it might seem severe, but you'd be surprised. Much like a cactus, they store a lot of nutrients and a lot of what's going on in their body. And so these roots just really need to come off because they're not going to do us any good. And as they break down in the bark, they're going to actually rob nitrogen from the soil to do the breakdown process. Oh my goodness. How embarrassing. My clippers are not clipping. Okay. So we just go through and get rid of anything that looks dead, desiccated, not viable. And then what I do, because I err on the side of overwatering with my orchids, not with anything else, kind of funny. I then take and I put, this is the orchid bark that we sell. It's a medium grade orchid bark. If you want a smaller grade orchid bark, you could use the micro bark that we sell that's actually for top dressing. It's the same material, just a smaller chunk piece. And you can use that for doing your orchids also. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of this bark. I don't tend to reuse the old bark and stuff. I just don't like to. So I'm going to take some of the bark and I'm going to put it in the bottom of the pot, just a little bit. Because what I want to do is kind of get this set up. Now, if you had a lot of air roots that were coming out, you would go ahead and tuck them in to the pot gently. And then what you're going to do is start putting bark into the pot. And what I do is I just kind of like tuck it in with my finger as I go. So it's a little bit, you want it a little snug because you don't want it to be falling out of its pot. And sometimes with these little pots, it's a little difficult to get all that stuff in there. And you might make a mess, but that's okay. That's what gardening's all about. Now, if you're an underwaterer, you could go through and use some sphagnum moss, green moss, and shred it up into little pieces and mix it with your bark. I would say I would only do probably 25% of the moss to 75% of the bark. So that's it. It is transplanted. It is ready to go and hopefully ready to bloom again. So those...
Do you water it after you transplant?
Yes, actually, great question. David just asked if you water it afterwards. Yes, you do. So we could take that and soak that in our lovely little mixture, and it would be very happy. This is another little Phalaenopsis. This is already done blooming also. And it does have a few nodes that are still available. So I'm going to do the same routine as I did on the other one. Just cut it back, transplant it, and then get it into happy times. The one I wanted to show you, because we get lots of questions about other orchids, and there are many kinds of orchids. Most of them appreciate being planted in bark. They don't usually like to be in soil. So there are the ones that live outside called cymbidiums that look very grass-like, and they have kind of a large kind of tuberish bulb where those grasses come out of, and then the spike comes out from below that. Those want to be tight and neglected. So do not transplant those unless they're absolutely bulging the pot out. The other thing with cymbidiums, they are not an epiphyte. They're a different kind of an orchid. They actually grow in soil, but they grow in loose soil. So what you want to do is you want to take potting soil, half bark, and mix it together. And that is what you would transplant cymbidiums with. No other orchid, especially these guys, do not want soil on their roots. They will rot out because the whole idea of their roots is that they're exposed to the air. The other thing, there's a lot of people, just like cooking, there are so many opinions on how to manage your orchids. So I'm here to tell you how I do it.
We have a question.
Oh, we have a question.
Kathy.
Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Should we take the brown bulbs out of a pot of cymbidiums?
No, actually, so the question is, do you remove the brown old tubers that are in a pot of cymbidiums? The answer is no, because those are, they're mother stock, for lack of a better term. If they're still viable, like you squeeze them like an onion and it's firm, then leave them alone. If you were planning on dividing that orchid for some reason, like to share it with a friend or something like that, and you had 2 or 3 or 4 of those older bulbs in there, you could divide and send 2 of those mother stock bulbs with the other, division that you're sharing with a friend. But otherwise, you want to leave them alone. Traditionally, they'll just keep pushing from the sides, just always adding new pups, new bulbs, new everything. And so unless you have like a really severe situation where you only have like maybe 2 or 3 leaf sets on the sides because all the mothers are retired, you could go through and remove them. The problem is it's going to take about 3 to 4 years before it'll bloom again, because it takes a long time for them to kind of get back into their groove. So really good question. Phalaenopsis. What was I saying? Other orchids. So that was cymbidiums. This is an oncidium. I know these names are crazy. I'm sorry. I didn't make them up. I bought this, probably a year ago. Now, this, minus this nice new leaf back here, this was what was having the orchid on it when I bought it. So this is a perfect example of the mother tuber. So this is the mother tuber, and this is the baby that's coming off of the mother tuber. Now, if you look at the progression on this, there's a mother bulb here. This actually started this, which is really kind of funny because this is so much smaller. But this was a little pup, and it created this guy, which then bloomed. So my hope is that this will do the same thing. So as these are germinating, you want to make sure you really kind of stay on the moisture, especially when it's sending out new leaves. You don't want it too wet. You don't want it too dry. But these are handled the same way. So I'll show you here. These are in bark, and a lot of it has started to kind of break down. There's a little bit of perlite in here, it looks like, also. But the thing I really wanted to show you is when they make cuttings or take the pups off, they actually pot them up in moss, which is, I'm not sure, can you see that? So this whole little thing is the original little plant that they potted up into a larger pot so it would bloom. But all of this is all moss. And so, in my opinion, I don't want that. I want bark because I don't want all that moisture because I'm afraid I'm going to kill it. So you can see these roots, for the most part, look really good. They're not really, they look a little brown, but in this kind of orchid, the roots are brown. In the Phalaenopsis, they're more white. So this has some white tones to it, but it's definitely more on the browner side. So when I go to repot this, I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Put some bark in the bottom and then start tucking the bark in around the plant. Now, there are many people that have strong feelings, again, back to cooking, about containers. So some people feel like you absolutely have to have a clear container for an orchid. And the reason behind that is because they're an epiphyte and they're exposed to the air and the oxygen and the sun and all that stuff. It's not a necessity. It's okay if it's in a green pot. It's not going to be the end of the world. And the other thing is you don't have to water your orchids with rainwater. There was somebody who came in not too long ago and said the only way to water your orchids is with rainwater. I'm sure that would be lovely, but if it's not raining, what are you going to do? So there's that. Care for fertilizer. We talked about Maxi. If you have pantry basics, you have this in your pantry, so it's not a concern. If you wanted to buy something specifically geared towards just your orchids, you could use the Maxi Bloom. That would be a great fertilizer to encourage bloom development. So Maxi. Also, you could use, this is a lighter formulation. This is the liquid seaweed fertilizer. You could mix that into your water and then let them sit for a little while. We also have this great product from We the Wild. This is a great organic fertilizer liquid, and you can use that for houseplants. You can use it for everything, but it works really well for orchids also. If you have pests, so pests that usually bother orchids are mealybug or scale. I rarely see aphids on them, but if you end up with pests, if it's scale or mealybug, you absolutely have to use the horticultural oil because you need a suffocant. You need it to suffocate the insect in its place. Neem oil will work for smaller insects like spider mites, aphids, what we would call soft-bodied insects. This would work. The oil would work for all of them, but it works best for mealybug and scale. That's also what we use on citrus. Also, just wanted to make a quick little point that we do have orchid pots. We don't have a lot of ceramic right now. We have more coming in, but we also have terracotta. The only concern with terracotta is that sometimes, because especially the Phalaenopsis, their roots, because they're an epiphyte, attach to porous material. So with terracotta, it might be a little dodgy with transplanting later on. You might have to go down with a sharp knife and kind of cut away some of the orchid roots because they might attach to the terracotta itself. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Well, if you guys have any other questions, by all means, ask them. We have a lovely little rainy day today. It's kind of nice. Rinse off all the leaves, maybe break down that little dusty road we're driving on. So hopefully you're having a great day. We are working hard here at the nursery on Christmas. and we look forward to seeing you.